And we're really delighted today to be able to be joined by Nat Clayton, who has made quite a long journey to be here today, so we're really grateful for her to come. You're all here to hear Nat speak and not me, so I'm going to keep my introduction to Nat as succinct as the bio I found on her website, which is that she makes small games and she writes words. That's it. So she's going to be talking today about a game, Can Androids Pray? So please just join me in welcoming Nat.
I'm going to just get started then. It is working. Hello. That's not as smooth as I wanted it to be. I'm Nat. I came down here from Edinburgh this morning. I spent 7 hours on a train and an hour in Peterborough waiting for a train. Good day. So, yeah, I'm based up in Edinburgh. I am a freelance games writer most of the time. I do most of my news writing for websites like Rock, Paper, Shotgun and Vice. I used to do some staff writing for a couple of businessy websites, and I've been sort of kicking around doing op-eds and features and interviews for just, I think, about a dozen sites at this point. Just sort of falling into writing about video games after night of tweeting about robots and someone asking if I wanted to put that on their website. But what was it, 3 years ago almost, I graduated from Abertay's game design course. So I have made a couple video games. Most of them aren't finished. Some of them are, which is incredible. They're mostly just like short mood pieces. The ones that have gotten the most attention are that one, which was my uni honors project. It was a sort of short anecdotal story about like queerness and coming out. The other one was that's the top right, which was like a tiny bitsy game, just sort of exploring like space and movement within it. And it got featured on Waypoint within an hour of coming out, which was kind of ridiculous. But the one that I've sort of gotten the most attention for, and the one that's like sort of taken all of my time in the last 2 years, was this game, Can Androids Pray? It's a sort of sitcom-length existential drama about two mech pilots who find themselves waiting for their deaths and just small talking their way through the last moments of their lives. It took about, I want to say, just under a year to make. We'll perhaps get into why that's not a really accurate figure later on. It came out last July for about $7 in this sort of bundled edition with two versions that, again, I'll get into later for more weird logistical reasons around itch. So I'm gonna guess that like we made about 400 sales, and no one in this room probably is in that number, so I'm gonna stick it on for, I guess, the first couple of minutes and maybe go through the first couple of dialogue sequences so we can sort of get a feel for what this is. I don't think this works. Where's my mouse? Is this working?
Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. mercy. And blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God.
So Canada's Prey is about a 20-minute long visual novel-y interactive fiction kind of thing. It's been sort of overly generously referred to as like similar to the likes of Bithel's Subsurface Circular. I don't know who made that comparison, but it's largely just sort of creating your narrative through like responses. There's no like branching narrative, it's just how do you want to decide to play out this ending between two characters. Oh, that's Windows. How do I close the thing? I think we can get the lights back up. So, Can Androids Pray was a sort of collaboration between myself and Xavier Nelson Jr., who is an American writer who has basically touched like every indie game released in the last 2 years. He is ludicrously hardworking. He is hardworking to the point where I'm very genuinely concerned about his health most times of the day. More lately, probably recognize him from Hypnospace Outlaw or Skatebird or an airport for aliens currently run by dogs is his current project. He would send me scripts and was sort of in charge of a lot of the production side of it, sort of talking to storefronts and publishers, and importantly got us in touch with a composer, Priscilla Snow, who her involvement came in about last February, I want to say, and really just like turned the project into like something that felt real. So it was kind of wild. We had we have this I want to say world-class writer and soundtrack artist and me who has a skill set, I guess, not a very good one. So I don't consider myself much of a specialist in any sort of way. I'm kind of just adept at bashing Unity against a rock until something comes out. And it's made this sort of strange game to talk about. I've sort of talked about the development processes in the past. I've tried to like run through the more exact history of how we made it. I've had a sort of post-launch depressed moping around it because game development it's a thing. But I think what I wanted to do with this talk is sort of explain how, as someone who has more of like a design background or is maybe more of a generalist than a specialist, how that can still be like an approach to making something by just running through what exactly I did on Can Androids Pray. So this is really a talk about sort of smashing my head against Unity and finding old pieces of code and salvaging old projects until we can make something that's kind of all right. I can't remember my animations on this. I tried to make PowerPoint look really good, but it's just slow and bad. So I did effectively two things on the game. I was basically like the glue that held the good work that other people made together. But also, as part of that, I was in charge of like what the game looks like. I was very much just like had my hands in Unity and determined the sort of overall vibe of the thing. So let's start with the first one. I'm not a coder. I had to make this game with a absolute minimum of scripting or programming or anything happening in it. So what I really needed to do was take these very good scripts that Nelson was sending me, and he'd send me a new draft of it every other month or so, and find a way to get that into an interactive story. I started out doing this around, I want to say, April, May 2018 is when he sent me the first script. And back then I was trying an engine called Ink to do it. Ink is proprietary software from a company called Inkle, I believe, and they make a lot of very prosy narrative games like 80 Days and Sorcery and Heaven's Vault. I'm not sure if it used Ink, but I believe it must have. And I used that quite early on, and I did quite quickly get it into a game. I had a pretty basic block out, and we had it sort of like you could play through Nelson's script and it would work as planned. You'd have choices working as normal. And it felt like we have this base to like move on and get somewhere and really like push ahead on this. And then I got a job, which made it really hard to make a video game. And it just sort of stopped for a while. So I had these 9 months where I didn't touch the game, and eventually, I think it came to about New Year 2019 was when I was like, I need to get back to work on this. But I really needed to make some fundamental changes with how I was making this game because Ink wasn't panning out. And there were quite a few reasons for that hit very quickly after we got that first prototype in place. So Ink is probably fine, and it is good for like a lot of narrative-y, especially like heavy prose, massive word count games in particular. But it was very hard to me to like do things with it. It has its own way of doing stuff, and getting it into Unity is kind of awkward. Getting it in a way where I could start messing around with how it's displayed or how it's telling the story was awkward. And it was very hard to like fit into the look I was starting to build for the game. There was no way to easily like art it up. And again, I did have a job at this time, and I did eventually do the thing that you're sort of encouraged to not do, which was quit my job to finish making an independent video game. I wouldn't super advise it. I had support structures in place where I could do that, and there were other reasons for quitting this job. I was working this very dry, business-y focused side of writing, which I think the people who worked there were really good, but it was an odd fit for me, and I was lucky enough following that to have contacts to set me up with news writing work elsewhere. So what is this next post? So to get back on track with Candroids, I took to Twitter and outsourced all my problems by just asking people to tell me, how do I do this, but without having to do any code and making it easy? And I had a few responses, but the one that sort of came up well was this program called Fungus, which is used very explicitly for like people making visual novels in Unity, sort of. And it worked very well for me because it has a lot of things going for it. It has a very simple like art setup, and it can be used for coding. So I think I have the project up here. I can't see it because this mouse won't leave the screen. How do I get it? Yeah, so if I like just pop open the Unity project here, Fungus is pretty good because it's just a flowchart where you tell the game to say things, and on top of like telling it to say things, you can also make it just do code without having to code. So you can like, where can I find one that is like actually busy? So So one thing that like immediately made my life a lot easier with Fungus is that you have these like set active blocks where you can just like turn things on and off, and that immediately solved all my problems with like camera angles and music transitions. And again, you could just like, it did all the dialogue for me, and it did it in a way where I could mess around with it easier and also read sort of the flow of the game in a way that was easier than ink, which is kind of laid out like a book, which makes it really easy to write with, but very hard to read. So where is PowerPoint? I put some slides here before I decided I was gonna like do just a demonstration. But again, so like the final good thing was that like I could build an aesthetic with Fungus. I did it in a very sort of hacky way where I just took the default art assets that it gives you and put them in Photoshop and changed them to what I wanted them to be, but it worked. It worked really well. It worked well enough that Xavier is now using Fungus for his next project, which is about speaking to stock pictures of dogs in an airport. It's scary. I'm very worried about what that is going to be. But all of this talk of like creating a look with Fungus sort of leads into the other point, which is like just talking about like getting to define the aesthetics of this thing. And once again, I don't think I'm like a trained artist in any way. I've like dabbled in like, I used to be really into art, and then high school just like killed that passion for me. I don't think I'm very bad at like the patience required to actually like learn fundamental skills, but I do have like a good eye for colors, which is largely my saving grace. A lot of the influences for this game were just a dead free-to-play mech game called Hawken that I liked from years back, and this Twitter account at Palitra or at Palette CLR, which just like every hour just sends up like cool color palettes, and like nicking those, just taking those, and it like sets up a nice scene quite immediately. So one of the interesting things about, is this gonna work? It is. One of the like weird quirks of Candroids is that it's sort of a salvaged together project from a lot of like old dead projects. And this whole kind of journey started when I decided to relearn 3D animation after sort of forgetting the 3 months we touched on back in uni. So I made this super basic like mech animation for walking, and was like, okay, let's just keep building on this. And I kept building on it, and where are we? Kept like sort of expanding the model in a way. So the mech that's in there now is just that model, but like it's a bad rig. I'm not a 3D artist. It's like janky. The rig is passable at best. The arms are weirdly proportioned. The texture is not good, but it's buried in the dirt, so you can't tell. But I started out with like higher ambitions to make this like very open-ended exploratory game. Like on my own, it was roughly, I was gonna try and do something that was a mix of Jalopy, which is a game about driving a busted Eastern European car across the former German, like East Germany, other countries in the region, in like the 80s, in this old Leica knockoff. That and a game called Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, which is just about roaming America and meeting strangers and sharing stories. So it was going to be like, oh, you've got a big robot and it like breaks down sometimes. And I got far enough to like hook in weird controllers and take it to one show in Dundee, and then realized it was way too goddamn ambitious for me. So that sort of went on the back burner and then went in the bin while we sorted out this new game with Xavier. And early on, I wanted to take a lot of the things that I learned so far as just like rendering the world. So the earliest version of the sort of Candroids environment was just this nice scene, and like Most of that's all still in the game, even if like the sky colors change, the ground colors change. I very quickly quite liked them. I'm not sure how well it plays up on this monitor, but there's like a nice fractal look to the shadows coming off. I had some old 3D models that I dumped in the background that are still in there somewhere. And again, that is like just so much of this game is just like old side projects. I eventually like grew on this scene with like started filtering the colors a bit more, plugging in a very early version of the UI. I think this is still the same layout the game's currently at. The mech is still the old early version with no arms, and it's not even posed, it's just half sunk in the dirt. And this is still while I was in my like really wanky 4x3 phase where I didn't want anything to be widescreen and I wanted everything to have like no pixels in it. But all of that was sort of dropped eventually because UI scaling sucks. Again, like, here's like, all I have from the salvaging is like taking the low poly terrain add-on that a friend pointed me towards years back for like getting this nice, like, Unity terrain looks bad, but if you can like make it look good, it looks really good. And using some like very basic like tune cell shading programs to make sure that like you have a lot more control over how the color sits on the landscape. There's a lot of like an absolute minimum budget of models. Most of the terrain is just this really bad like diamond rock, just like scaled and positioned weirdly. There's a few Pro Builder cubes for like key areas like this back ridge. These buildings were from the last project, but all of the other models are just sort of like, they help break up, having like little moments where you can break up the like monotony of seeing the same rock over and over. It just like suggests more to the world. I don't know where I was going with all of this. Yeah, that's where I go. Right, so like, we have this like very salvaged together world. But it was nice to like take a lot of things that had been like little experiments or side projects and sort of use them as this, to help create a cohesive whole, even if that whole is a very sort of fuzzy amalgamation of things. I did also do a lot more experimentation with like showing the game off. I did a lot of the taking this game out and about when we were in development, when we restarted development in 2019 after the 9-month break. We didn't have any sort of marketing budget, which is like, for all the praise we got, like we didn't get that many sales. We did well for what it was, but our marketing was essentially Xavier and me just tweeting viciously about this game nonstop. I would take it to shows like Res last year. We took it to a night at the Dundee V&A Museum. I took it to a festival in Berlin briefly. And it was nice to sort of, even just like creating little posters to help like, even if they're not representative of like what actually happens in the game, it like creates this nice tone or like sells the mood a bit more. So in June, we released it. So I want to sort of wrap up by talking about that process a little bit. It's weird to release a game because we have to sort of decide when it's done, and there were so many points coming up to July where it was like, it was June or July? June, one of them, where it was like, there's always more that could be done. And there were so many points in that year where I wanted it to be done. And then you give it another month and it's like, oh, this really did for that month. But we did decide on selling it around the time that sort of Xavier was going to be at a PAX or something to shout it out. Again, what was it? Dirty News. We took it again to all these shows, and part of releasing it when we did was it was starting to get exhausting to work on this thing. It's weird to sort of look at the finished product and see like that it took over a year when it is this very small thing that probably could have been done in a couple of months. if I was working on it like a job. But it was actually quite nice to sort of take some time with it. And it was only in these last few months where we took it to London, we took it to Berlin, we took it to Dundee. Now, Xavier was talking to publishers on one end and they'd show up on my end the next day. And it was just a lot. But I'm glad we released it when we did, because it seemed to get a pretty good reception. There was a weird quirk with releasing it because, so we launched it on itch. It eventually came out on Xbox, and not to like go too deep, but I think Xavier has plans for things happening in future. But we released it on itch, and because we released it on itch, we had to create 2 versions of it, because itch doesn't really have support for like collaborators. This wasn't a project where it was like we could create a studio for it. That would have like come into so many weird logistical issues with like taxing because he's in the US and I'm here. But also it's like, this was a quick hobby thing. So we got around that by creating 2 versions with slight palette swaps and then putting them in the bundle for the same price as the individual versions, under the assumption that if you only buy one of them, you're being like kind of a dick. We did at least put a like slightly higher tier to put Priscilla's soundtrack in it, because it's actually, it was weird because we only had like the one music track, 2 music tracks in the files, but she did like an incredible job of like spinning that into like an EP in a way. And it came out and like, it was kind of wild how much people liked it. We ended up getting on like, we got on Wireframe's top 25 games of their first, 2019 kind of, but their first 12 months of being a magazine that exists. We had a couple of contributors to the sort of Giant Bomb invites people to do their top 10s, and we got some pretty cool people like listing us alongside their games. Fox Puppet on YouTube said it was great and depressing. But that's sort of, it's weird because like, it's weird because this whole thing's been a weird exercise in game development, which is something that my relationship to has waned, I think, increasingly since the game came out. But like, I was in quite a stressed point when we launched this, and especially in the months after. I did a talk like this at Edinburgh Uni shortly after, and it was like, wow, that was just me moaning for 20 minutes. But it was, like what came out of it, it was really heartwarming to see like people enjoyed this like short sort of existential scream that we put into the wild. And I was meant to do all that spiel on this slide. I have put a note here saying freestyle for a bit, and that's really rude of me. I was on a train, so I didn't actually write notes for that. Bye.
Lovely, thank you, Nat. Well, we're going to open it up to some questions. It might be worth asking who has played the game. You should play it.
Dan, I thought you would have at least.
I played it.
Thank you. No one in like my near circle has played it. Like people in Edinburgh. Rachel hasn't played. My partner hasn't played it because it's really sad.
It is really sad. But it is like there's a particular moment.
Yeah.
I think so. I'm not going to talk spoilers here, but like you just kind of go and play it. I'll let.
It hit very hard with one guy in particular, another Scottish journalist who was like, sort of having a bit of a midlife moment.
I can see that. So I think it's a game that makes you think, I think, which is it's really interesting. So yeah, I'm going to kick off with a question. Nat, I wondered how much because you spoke a little bit about how kind of some of the elements of the game kind of came back from other projects that you had as well. What was your thought process when you first got the script in terms of visualising that world? Was it a lot of new stuff came, or did you think, oh, actually what I've done somewhere else would be really
There was a lot of like early blocking out and then just like using things as placeholders, and then the placeholders just became like a look. I was using a lot of things from like very similar projects, and it started to gel into something before I could actually like consciously decide what the style was going to be, but like it felt like it was working for that.
I mean, I felt just, I was really interested in your talk when you're talking about kind of what you each brought to kind of the development process. Could you just speak about that? Like, so you said that he was based in the scriptwriter was based in the US? Was that where was the composer based?
Priscilla is also in the US somewhere. So we did a lot of just sharing files over Twitter DMs, which is a really bad way of managing your content. But sort of getting sent emails for like a script, and then getting sent links for the music to put in. It actually made it easier because I was the only person with the access to like the Unity project, so we didn't actually have to fuck around with content management too much.
Sure, okay. Has anybody got any questions for Nat at all?
Yes, you mentioned the scriptwriter got it with the composer. How did you get in contact with the scriptwriter?
I met Xavier at a speaking gig in London 3-4 years ago. At the time, he was living in Italy for whatever. He's just like everywhere, and it's terrifying. He was in Italy, and I think he was flown over to do. There used to be an event called Video Brains every month in London. So I came down from Scotland to do a talk of that, and he came out from Italy just before he headed back to the States, and we sort of gelled there and sort of got in touch more. At that time, I was just coming out of uni, and I was like, I know all these really cool people. Can I like collaborate with any of them on anything? And we did get talking around the start of 2018.
Yeah.
So you said this came together from like an amalgamation of like previous prototypes of projects and stuff, and it kind of took shape from something bigger that you were working on before. And do you think that now things might take shape from the stuff that you've learned here and
absolutely not
in this project? No.
I don't know. I'm kind of really like let a lot of that stuff just go. I feel like I've done what I wanted to do with all of that. I don't even know if I want to make another game yet, honestly.
That's interesting because a lot of the, when I was looking up and reading about this game, there was a number of reviews that were alluding to this being sort of part of like a bigger IP. Was that them kind of stretching, or is that something that had been kind of put out there from the offset?
One reviewer has been nagging my menchies for a sequel for a while. I'm not working on one. That's all I'll say.
Okay, so there is some demand there, but yeah.
I don't know what the demand is.
Sure.
Nelson's working on a lot right now. That's all I'll say.
Good. Any other questions at all?
Yeah.
It was interesting to hear you talk about when you consider it to be finished. As a sort of an independent publisher, does that take away some of the pressures? Because I imagine that if you're being commissioned or tied to a publishing house, that they've got very strict deadlines and things. So
I've only ever made stuff myself, so we didn't have a publisher. There is a publisher tied to an Xbox port that Xavier was involved in. I wasn't, because it sounded like a lot of work. Well, it doesn't sound like a lot of work. It was a lot of money, was the thing. But it was generally just like when it came out was just increasing like conversations between me and Xavier, like DMing each other and saying like, okay, when is this done? And it was really just working out when good timing for it would be, when it wouldn't get like lost in noise of other releases, when it would like, when we would have audiences for it. So again, it was like a lot of the early release ideas were Zilli were going, oh, I'm going to be doing a panel at a PAX or something. We should launch around then so I can shout out or something.
So do you prefer to have deadlines, or do you prefer to make
No. It was hard because this was, if we had like a budget of anything, or like, I don't say expectations because we wanted it to do okay, but like actual expectations, like expectations of making a return on this, we would probably be more. But this was always quite on the cusp of like a hobby project more than like a commercial project, it felt like. This is very, I like to say I did the opposite of crunch on this. Where people are saying we're working like 70-hour weeks, and it's like, I worked a 70-hour year.
What do you think? I was kind of interested in this visual novel as a genre. Do you have a sense of where it might go with that, how that genre might develop? Because I mean, you've got 20 minutes of game here. Do you have a sense of how it might be sustained over a kind of a longer form experience?
I'm not super clear. I don't play very many of them. I've played a couple, like the ones I've played are games like Heaven Will Be Mine and We Know the Devil, and the visual novel parts of games like Pyre, and they're all quite bite-sized in like the narrative segments of them. I think a lot of the reception we got was that ours didn't need to be longer. It's a very compact story, and I don't think it would benefit from being stretched out in a way, but there's definitely ways to like see character relationships build up if you're working with a longer time, because it's like essentially just like reading a book, but you get to choose the lines sometimes. Yeah.
You probably maybe said this earlier. I'm kind of curious about the title, Can Androids Pray? It's kind of cool.
It's a good title. You'd have to ask Sophia. It's always weird because we would take it to shows and it's a very writing-heavy game, and people would like ask about things like the title or the script, and it's like, I just made the look pretty.
From my perspective, having played the game, I would say it becomes clear.
Yeah, it's very Xavier's quite religious in a way, and I think a lot of this was ways of him discussing that. So there are definitely like religious elements that pop up later up in the title. So it's just a nice name, I think.
You're not a Philip K. Dick fan then, is he?
You just have to ask him.
I have another question. Do you wish you had a budget for this?
I'm not sure. It would be a very different thing, I think. The way this existed was, if it had a budget, I would have probably had to have jumped off work earlier for it to actually like commit to that, and that would have probably meant I would be putting more. It would have taken more like time and resources, and it would have been more of a commitment, I think. So I'm not sure what it looks like with a budget. I liked it. That'd be the weird thing as well. If it had a budget, it would also have more expectations for when it came out. And I'm quite happy with what we got out of it. It is my best performing release by far, not counting like commercial games I worked on during uni breaks. But that was like a wild reception for a game that was like, oh, the budget was like my lunches. If it had like momentum behind it, there would have been so much more like pressure for it to do well. So I don't know.
I
Yeah.
mentioned at the beginning being a game writer. scriptwriter for several websites. Is that something you do regularly? Do people approach you?
So it's something I've been doing largely on the reg since about October 2017. It started, well, there's like the joke answer I give is it started because I was drunk on a holiday and tweeting about a game I like dying, and a writer for PC Games N said, I'll give you $50 to put this on our website. So I did that only comes after like having those connections from going to talks during uni and stuff. But I did a bunch of sort of couple of pieces a month for them for a few weeks. I had a full-time job doing remote staff writing for 2 business-focused websites for like PC and mobile. And my current stuff is, so I do weekends and Thursday evening news writing for Rock Paper Shotgun and sort of occasional pieces for Vice Games. And those were just people approaching me out of the blue. I know the RPS one is I have history with their news editor, Alice O'Connor, because she lives like up the road from my office. And I don't know how the Vice one came about. Rob Zachney just like said, let's do some news. But game development is very cliquey. Game journalism is even cliquier. It's so much about like just like the actual advice I give on all of this is just like going and not chumming up, that's a bad word. Just like making friends with people at shows and events and things if you can like afford to make it out there. And then just like stuff happens and you don't know how it happened, but it did and it's working. Yeah?
You had sort of the different posters for all the shows and stuff you went to.
Yeah.
I really liked them, pretty cool. And what, did you have to do a lot of like prep for each show? Did you have to reflect on a lot of time to prepare for each one?
I usually have to like get a version of the game that works. That's the biggest hurdle. And that was actually not too difficult because the game is kind of just a straight shot narrative. So there's no like, it's a hard game to have bugs in. It's more going through the script to make sure you're not like repeating dialogue or missing triggers. And getting a version that isn't one of the like 12 builds that exist on my PC that's just broken with stuff I'm toying with. And the posters were just a fun thing I did if I had like a spare hour or so. I didn't actually have to make a poster for Rezzed because we were part of the Left Field collection, which for my money is not biased or anything, but like the best part of Rezzed. It's like the little basement room where they take all the like super quirky, weird small games. And I think it was like the busiest room of the show last year, but it was lots of games like Ape, Controller, NES, or Frog Detective, or like weird radio installation games. But they like refused posters. The backing for their booths was just a big cardboard wall and you just drew your own posters on it.
Any more questions? No, okay. Do you feel like you've had enough of a grilling now?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I hope you found it interesting, and I think what we've learned is go and play the game. I think, and give Nat some money. Give both of them some money, definitely.
All three of us.
Yeah, all 3 of them, yeah. Get the soundtrack as well. So just, join me again in thanking Nat for